There's one element of response to suffering that is as we've been discussing, agency, and that's so much in the moral realm. It's in the realm of action and human attempts at control. I wonder if we could transition here a little bit to another kind of response to suffering, and that is a kind of attempt to understand, a kind of knowledge. And some of your recent work in interpreting Job's kind of psychic destruction and demolition, the kind of suffering that he undergoes in his life that we learn about in that scripture, it leads to a kind of silence, you say, a kind of unknowing.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if you might talk about the nuances there, about how we can approach a response to suffering that might have something to do with unknowing and our silence in the wake of it.
Yeah. Suffering is always a major challenge to our knowing. Challenge in terms of what's going on, and in particular challenge in terms of what's going to happen. What can I expect as I'm undergoing the suffering? What are the hopes? And so the kind of fate of hope and fate of and understanding of what's happening and what's going to ensue is what challenges us in a profound kind of way.
Yeah.
And I think we sometimes want to explain suffering, want to control it by various kinds of means. Practically, sometimes we want to control it, right? But we also control it intellectually. And often we come to too quick of closures because we can't quite project what it is. In fact, I think that we sometimes cannot, in the suffering, project rightly as to what would we want to decide. We don't know what's going on, and we don't know what ought to happen. We know what we want, but it's not always clear that what we want can happen or that it is a right and appropriate thing to happen. And I think this moment of not knowing is so fundamental. You see it in Job, and Job realizes after this terrifying speech of God that he can't quite understand his life, that he needs to live in the realm of trust. You see it. You see it with Jesus hanging on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? A kind of dashing of hopes that happens. You see it in Paul also, which is very, very fascinating with him, when he says, well, we don't know how to pray. Now, you think that person who suffers exactly knows how to pray. I know what to ask,
because they're somehow more connected to even like the person of Christ in that.
But also in my suffering, I just get rid of this thing. I can imagine a very different life very easily. What's gonna come, and yet Apostle Paul writes there, we don't know what to pray, and this is kind of a sense of unknowing, which is, I think, a condition of possibility of growth. And he talks about unknowing in a sense of every hope contains darkness. And this sense of darkness of the future into which we go, whether we are suffering or, as a matter of fact, whether we live just our ordinary life, except we think that everything's bright and clean and clear when we don't suffer. When we suffer, we know that the future is really problematic. But this darkness of the future, darkness of the hope, I think is a recognition of it, and non-understanding in face of it is fundamental.
I mean, there the scripture, we see through a glass darkly. We hope in things that are not seen.
Exactly.
The dark side of hope. Right? We often speak in terms of glimmers of hope, right? Where there is light, but the dark side of hope is looking out into the dark, and sometimes wandering, sometimes when that dark is also silent.
Right, right. Because we tend to think of hopes in the vocabulary of my own teacher, Jürgen Moltmann.
Yeah.
We tend to think of hope in terms of optimism.
Or God's promises fulfilled.
Or some kind of very specific outcomes that will take us from here to what is there, rather than hope being something new that comes to us in a kind of surprising way. So that
would you say that's a forward-looking kind of hope, as a looking from this vantage point, like from earthly vantage?
It's a hope that's given. Whose reason has given attempts to extrapolate from what is now to what is going to be.
Okay, all right.
But the hope
eschatological, perhaps.
So it's but this is actually eschatological structure of our lives, of anticipations too. I think, because you know what you might want, but I think we also know that hopes can be very much illusory, projections, constructs of our imagination, and can kind of reinforce the oppressions that we are suffering in many ways. And so this, I mean, I see it almost paradigmatic. I don't know, experiences of love are really extraordinary. And so you have hopes, right?
Right.
You have kind of images of what the person with whom you fall in love will be and look like.
Yeah.
And so you kind of stretch yourself toward that.
You see the whole relationship before you. I mean.
But you've kind of identified what that kind of is in your head, and you're kind of trying to match.
Yeah.
But the most fortuitous and most fulfilling is when you recognize something and you say, now I see what I was looking for.
Yeah.
All right, the kind of the fulfillment gives you the eyes to see what is it that you wanted.
Sure.
As you're seeking fulfillment, right?
Right.
And this is a magical thing. That's why love is magical in this way, right? Because it is not simply, I've wanted this and I just got it.
Yeah.
It's kind of boring, right?
Right.
But I've been transformed in getting what I was hoping.
Yeah. So again, in Paul, and perhaps Paul's kind of awareness of kind of Job's silence, of non-understanding. You say that honors great suffering in a way that explanatory and justificatory speech cannot, and that it is intellectually and morally more honest, this kind of silence of unknowing, fitting the scope of any possible knowledge we could have about both God and the world. Perhaps more importantly, you say, Paul's non-theodical approach, an approach without theodicy, toward suffering stands firmly in the tradition of Exodus, the paradigmatic way of contending with suffering in the Bible. And this is encapsulating comment that God's response to suffering was liberation, not explanation.
Right.
And that is just there's some profoundness there. I wonder if you'd just comment on what that means.
Yeah. So my sense is that. One of the things a sufferer really doesn't want an explanation. Most of them, just get me out.
Yeah.
Explanation doesn't do something.
Yeah.
Explanation kind of confirms me in the state in which I am. Yeah. Right. In that sense, that there is a kind of whiff of putting up with suffering in attempts to explain and to justify suffering, right? So that's kind of one part of what I'm trying to say. That the other part is that in order to understand what each of the events in my life means, in order to kind of fit it into some kind of a narrative, I need to be at the end of my life. In order to, because as my years go, I reinterpret all the events and suddenly realize, possible meanings of them. I think that's the same is true with the entire human history. So that if the Odyssey is possible, it's possible from the end of history backwards.
Okay.
Because only then the clarity kind of comes. And I think that's part of the reason why whether in Exodus, or Apostle Paul, he doesn't spend a lot of time trying to kind of explain or justify.
Yeah.
He's very much resting on the hope of transformation.